Welcome to Solutions with Courtney Anderson. I am your guide, Courtney Anderson. Thank you for joining me. Today, I am so fascinated by today's topic. We have a show today that is part of the Myth Warriors series. And of course, our Myth Warriors series is all about us, you and I, donning our warrior gear. We have our defensive gear to defend against threats. We have our offensive gear to get out there and attack. And what are we fighting? Well, we are out there trying to find out what is oh, I hate this word in some respects, but what's real? What's something that we can think, oh, okay, that's something I can make a good decision on, might be good data, might be helpful information, and what else is out there that really isn't reliable? It's not credible. It might be a myth, a falsehood, a fallacy, or a lie. What is going on? So, our Myth Warrior series, uh, today we have a show topic, and the show episode topic is Stereotype Threat does not exist. Stereotype threat does not exist. So, as I said, I always encourage you to come to CourtneyAnderson.com, give your ideas, feedback, suggestions, reach out to iTunes and or any other resource and leave your reviews or ratings. We really appreciate it. Spread the word on your social media. Let the world know what we're doing here and that what we're sharing in terms of our potential solution sets. It's greatly appreciated. We are, of course, here in episode 151. Episode 151. And so when we're looking at this show topic of stereotype threat does not exist, we need to define what stereotype threat is. um, and like I said, this is a fascinating show in my estimation because it was came out of a conversation I was having. I was having a mentoring conversation, and so often when I'm talking, well, actually not just one conversation, it was a couple of conversations I was having. I'm thinking of another social conversation I was having. So what will happen is I'm talking to somebody and they start to give me reasons why they can't do something. Um, so if you've ever had somebody talk to you and let's say it's a female friend and they say something like, oh, I've I'm just a mom, I'm just a mom. I wouldn't be good at that, or, I don't think I could do that. It's an example of someone potentially, I mean, they could be accurate, that quote, their identity as a mom results in their inability to do a certain thing, whether it's related to a task or a project, or maybe going out into some paid work outside the home. People start to tell themselves and then they tell other people why they can't do something, and they relate it to some sort of grouping. So if someone says, oh, it's because I'm a mom, or, and I haven't heard this in a, well, actually, let me take it back. I was going to say I haven't heard this in a while, and then I just remembered I did have an interaction where I did hear someone say this. So if you ever talk to someone and let's say again it's a female and they say, well, I'm just not good at math. I'm just not good with numbers. I'm just, my brain, I just don't, I'm a girl. And I was going to say I haven't heard that in a long time since I was a young girl, but now I stopped and I realized I did just recently hear someone express something like that, which was frustrating. Or let's say it's a gentleman. Let's say you're talking to a guy and the guy says, "Oh, yeah, guys don't express their feelings that way. I couldn't say that. I couldn't let somebody know how I really feel. I'm a guy." Now you may think, well, it's totally different if someone's talking about their feelings and someone talking about their ability to compute mathematical equations or their ability to complete a project. And they're not necessarily the same. And I'm not saying they are, but I am saying that the inability to perform a task because you are associating the task, the project with these external identifiers is the same. And I would also argue that if you talk to someone and they tell you that they can't do something because of their gender, whether it's a male or female or um, any gender identity, that's a problem. And so when we're asking today, we're trying to find out, hey, is this thing stereotype? Does that exist? What is that thing? Well, let's start at the beginning. There are a couple of resources. Again, this is episode number 151. Come to CourtneyAnderson.com, to our show page on CourtneyAnderson.com. We'll have a whole website page just about this show, and there's several different attachments and linked content, because this is an area that I do not at all have the individual research expertise to share with you. My own research, I have not had the ability. Although now I've been intrigued. So I may in the future share some of my original work, but right now what we're doing is relying on some other researchers and some reports of this idea of a stereotype. So one of the resources that you're going to see in the show notes, again, come to page 151 on CourtneyAnderson.com, is an article. Uh, it's entitled Contending with Stereotype Threat at Work, a model of long-term responses. So contending with stereotype threat at work, a model of long-term responses. So this is a 2011 paper, and it is very, very, I think, helpful and a pretty short and compact analysis, relatively speaking. Uh, of it's about 30 pages, 31 pages. That's including all the reference pages. And this was a paper that was presented at the Cultural Psychology and Education Annual Winter Roundtable, their 25th version of that, at the Teachers College in Columbia University, New York. And so, again, I've attached the resource there for you to look at. But there's a definition from this fascinating work that purports the following definition. Because we're asking the question, stereotype threat. Does it exist? Then we have to first ask the question, what is it? Okay, so stereotypes are widely held cultural beliefs that are resistant to change. So that right from the roundtable paper I just referenced. Stereotypes are widely held cultural beliefs that are resistant to change. Okay, so let's look at it. A widely held cultural belief. All right, so widely held gets me the idea. It's not like one person thinks Courtney Anderson is goofy. That would not necessarily be a widely held cultural belief if only one person thought that. If some metric of widely held, the majority or lots of, or the majority of people in a certain geographic location thought Courtney Anderson is goofy, potentially it'll be widely held. Cultural beliefs, that is fascinating. And it's interesting. One of the things we talk about in other programs, when we're always talking about, of course, a couple of things, surpassing our goals and practicing the joyful art of business. Because, of course, if we're miserable, then we're not really getting the best outcomes, the return on our investment of our time and resources. The idea of culture, in so many of these programs, we talk about getting out of your own sort of routine and expanding your understanding of the world. So it could be going down a different street you've never gone down. It could be trying a new food you've never had. It could be traveling to another part of the world you've never been to. And the thing I was getting to is that when we think about we hear the word like cultural beliefs, I think a lot of us think, well, what does that mean? That sounds really squishy and vague and weird. But the thing about culture is, until you are in a different culture, you don't typically fully recognize the power that your culture has on you individually. In other words, one of the best ways to figure out and to really kind of observe the power of culture is to do what we just talked about, trying those different things, because you'll realize how much of your thoughts, of your beliefs, are cultural. And I know for me personally, especially traveling to parts of the world that are, far away on a map, and a very different history and a very different day-to-day experience, it reminds me of how much of what I think isn't my own individual idea. It's not something I thought up. It's not anything original. It's not anything at all. It might not even be something that I really believe when I sit down and explore it. But what it is something I've absorbed. It's something that's part of the culture that I've been in. And sometimes I have to share there have been times I've said things or thought things and I've been surprised and how much I'm just I'm operating on these cultural beliefs that I often didn't even ever challenge. I just sort of thought, well, that's how the world is, right? But it isn't how the world is. That's how one little segment of the little teeny tiny piece of the world is. That's a cultural belief. And it's everything from, what we eat and when we eat. I know you go to some parts of the world and you think, well, people eat so late here. It's so late. It's so late in the evening. Well, no, it's not. That's just your cultural belief. You go to other parts of the world and you think, you know, wow, people eat, so much. There's so much food here. Well, no, not really. That's your cultural belief. You'll go to parts of the world and you'll think, wow, people are so fashionable here. Look how fashionable they are. Their dress and their fashion. Again, cultural belief. And it works the other way too. You go places and you think, oh, this is awful. This is so dirty. Or I can't believe that people, keep their environment like this. I would keep it cleaner. Again, cultural belief. And part of the reason why it's a bit surprising when we realize how little ownership we have of our own ideas. How much of it we just are like little sponges. We just absorbed it. Well, that's how you do things. Well, yeah, that's how you do things in that part of the world, in that culture. That doesn't mean that's how things are done. It doesn't mean it's right or wrong necessarily. And I must say, when we go through this experience of broadening our mindset, of broadening our life experiences, I think one of the reasons there's a lot of resistance to it, of course, is because it's scary. And if you've never thought of that before, and then you go out in the world and you experience this totally different way of doing something, it challenges your own idea. And it also, in some ways, challenges your own definition of yourself, right? Who are you? What do you believe? And the other question that's really scary that ties obviously into our show here is, why do you believe what you believe? Why do you believe that you eat at a certain time? Why do you believe that people wear a certain type of clothes or any clothes at all? Why do you well, there's many, especially when you think about a lot of there are less and less of these groups available today because of the advanced transportation, but go look and think about the times when some isolated group of people, population, and isolated as relative is, quote, discovered. That word is potentially offensive and actually offensive in many instances. But you'll go and you'll find that group, and even sometimes when you travel, and you'll go to some part of the world and people say, oh, well, we'll go and we'll sort of see how indigenous people live. And sometimes that's part of a very valid, wonderful experience. And sometimes it's just part of exploitation of an economic desire for tourist dollars. But that aside, when you think about it, you sort of think, oh, okay. Well, a lot of times when we think about isolated populations and they are clothed differently, maybe they live near the equator, so they're not wearing a suit and tie. And some people think, well, who cares? Well, the point is, though, when you start to challenge some of your, or even one of your cultural beliefs, that can open up the idea that you need to, potentially there's a lot more in there you need to challenge. Are women good at math? Do men have the ability to express their emotions? Are different ethnic groups and racial groups, different colors of people, able to do different things? Do some people, quote unquote, they're just more athletic than others? Is that accurate? Based on a group? Not based on a person. I could certainly look at a person and say, look at that person. That's Susie Smith. Susie Smith is an excellent swimmer. I know this because I just saw Susie Smith swimming and she was excellent. Okay. If someone said Michael Phelps, that's an excellent swimmer, I would agree. I watched him swim in the Olympics. It was very exciting. Looked excellent according to the professional amateur judging process, the best in many of the world events. Okay, so it's not a stereotype because it's not a group, it's a person. It's an individual based on what they've done. How about the group though? When we say, oh, groups of people, those people are great at basketball. Those people are awesome at hockey. Where does that come from? Stereotype is a widely held cultural belief. That's where it's coming from. And it's everything from we should all wear shirts every day to those people are good at that, to what women do, to what men do, to what young people do, to what old people do. And again, what young means, what old means, what gender means, all these things. And when you start thinking and challenging yourself, some people, like I said, it can be scary because then people feel like, well, I'm so confused. What do I know? What do I know if I'm up here in some world where everything is open for debate? What you eat and what you wear and what time you go to sleep and forget about this. What the sports when you leave your cultural safety zone, the area where you feel competent that you know the cultural expectations, and you go to other parts of the world. People are talking about events and things you don't even know what those are. It's one thing to argue about what makes a great professional hockey player, but when you go to another part of the cultural experience on the planet and you're talking to people about a sport you've literally never heard of, you don't even know what it is, you can't even begin, you don't even have a stereotype to add. You don't even know what it is. And I think that the thing about the show that is fascinating, not the only thing obviously, but certainly one of the things that's fascinating, is this journey sort of into ourselves and and being brave enough, right? And we talk about all the time, if we're going to surpass our goals, then we have to get out there in whatever way that means. It might mean in your imagination, it might mean in your physical world experience if you're able and or interested. It might be tasting something different or smelling something different or listening to different music or listening to different languages. How often when people are presenting with people who speak different languages, you just shut down and tune them out. Oh, I don't understand what they're saying. Well, yeah, obviously you don't understand it because you don't speak the language. Does that mean, though, that you're not going to try to engage in some way? Why don't you just sit there and listen? You might be amazed what you can pick up on if it's just body language. If it's just, I recently was at an event. That was a large event, and there were two American Sign Language interpreters. They were there interpreting for one of the speakers. Now, I do not speak American Sign Language. Now, it's on my to-do list of things that potentially I'd like to take just even an overview class and learn more about it, because it to me looks like a fascinating language. And even though I don't understand it, I didn't just tune out and ignore. I actually was riveted by. And I've had this happen many times, especially when I've worked in the U.S. and with multinational organizations, and when I've worked overseas. Then we have to have translators because I need a translator for other people. Other people need a translator for me. And so I love seeing how translators and listening to how translators translate what I'm saying, especially because sometimes I'm very dramatic, I'm told. And it's fun. And one of the things I gave a speech a couple of years ago, I can't remember where, um, and someone came up to me and said something along the lines of they didn't even really need the translator, because I use my body so much when I'm giving a sort of a really um, engaging performance like that. There's so much facial expression and body language, and I move around so much, and that made me kind of happy because that's part of the goal. If I can hold your attention and you don't even understand necessarily the linguistics of what I'm saying, but I'm conveying information to you through all the other parts of my body and my communication, then that made me feel that pretty good actually. So the point simply is that our cultural beliefs are simultaneously make us feel secure, right? We know how the world works. We know those people are the ones that are really good at bird watching, and that's how those people are in terms of who should be um, working with little kids. And we know that's the person, those are the ones that are excellent at numbers. It gives you that sort of sense of security. That's what you're supposed to wear. That's what you're supposed to eat. That's what time you're supposed to have your dinner. It gives you a sense of security. It makes things seem predictable. And there's potentially comfort in that. Of course, we know in real life, though, we don't really have. It's a lot of that is just an illusion, right? Because one, it's all relative, and two, we don't know what today holds, much less what tomorrow holds. But I understand the allure of cultural beliefs because it does. It makes it quote simpler because you kind of think, oh, okay, I know what to do, and more importantly than that, I know what to do. I know what not to do, so I know how to fit in, right? I know how to make sure people like me and that I'm doing quote the right thing. And it's scary, on the other hand, when you start to examine these things and ask yourself, who am I really and what do I think? Not what does this culture think? Not what has this culture told me to think, but what do I think? What do you think as individuals? What do we really think? What do we really want to wear? What do we really like to eat? All of this can be, like I said, either exciting and exhilarating and awesome, or for some people, it can be just overwhelmingly scary. I've talked to people, and there's amazing statistics and about the amount of people who will be born, live their entire life, and die, leave the planet as we know it, and never leave, like a really small geographic area, like never have traveled more than 50 miles away their whole life. And some people would say that's awesome because what a commitment to community you have. They must have had a pretty strong sense of security, of understanding that 50-mile area because they spend so much of their time there. They probably hopefully made good ties and friendships and relationships, and there's something positive to that. On the other hand, you think other people would say, well, that's awful. You saw so little of this world. You didn't even see anything of your state. Again, there is no answer necessarily, but the idea is we have opportunities while we're alive right now, today, you and I. We're taking part in the program together, which I'm very grateful for you being here. But when we talk about, surpassing your goals, and we talk about this whole idea of looking at how you feel, do you feel over more often than not, good about what's happening with your professional activities, whether they're paid or volunteer, or do you feel horrible and depressed and overwhelmed? It opens up part of this analysis is you going inside your own mind and trying to figure out, well, who am I? What do I think? What do I believe? What do I want? And again, it's scary. It's much easier to just look around and say, what am I supposed to do? And then the society and the culture tells you, and then you go do that thing. It requires much less work. You just sort of regurgitate back what they told you to. I'll wear what you told me to. I'll think what you told me to. I'll eat what you told me to. So all this is trying to put it in a broader context when we talk about stereotypes and stereotype threat, instead of just saying, which again, this is all cultural. It's interesting. So the stereotype is a widely held cultural belief that's resistant to change. Why is it resistant to change? Part of it is because we've been discussing, because it's safe. If I know that I'm going to eat, a baked potato, and I know what my baked potato tastes like, and I know how a baked potato is made, then I'm safe. I know when I get ready to eat it what it's going to taste like. I already have eaten it before. I know exactly how I made it last time, and I know how my family and friends make it, and I know when I go to eat it, it tastes exactly the same. And I know that we don't use any different, condiments or other food flavoring, and I know that, and it makes me feel comfortable. I'm not frightened or scared. It won't be too spicy. I'm not worried that it'll make my stomach upset. I know what it's going to taste like because this is what we always do. Makes me feel safe. The resistance to change is how alluring it can be to have these cultural beliefs. Again, I fit in, hopefully, or if I don't fit in, I can ask or watch and figure out what I need to do to fit in. We're social organisms. There's so much research on this. I've taken some really interesting classes. Everything from anthropology, to what they call evolutionary psychology. There's so much just to learn, right? And every time you bring these new ideas into your existence, it does challenge in either a really healthy, really fun way, like, wow, I never realized this music is great. I wish I started, listening to salsa earlier. I love it. Or in some people, they're frightened and think, this is scary. How much of me is really me? And how much of me is I've just been like a little sponge or a little, vessel that's been filled up with what everyone else told me? And that's a scary question. If you're not prepared to sort of work through it and think, okay, I'm going to figure this out. How much is me? What do I really like? as an individual versus what this collective, this cultural belief is telling me. So all of us have stereotypes. When I say hey, have them, I mean we use them. We have them about other people, about other groups, about other food, about other places, about all kinds of things. And other people use them about us. Every single person. So if you're listening and you're in New Zealand, you have them. If you're listening and you're in Cape Town, South Africa, you have them. If you're listening and you're in Uruguay and Montevideo, you have them. If you're listening and you're in, you know, Des Moines, Iowa, you have them. One of the things that's made me excited about life, especially when I'm feeling overwhelmed or sad or something really bad's happened, I I I look at the opportunity to ask these questions. Who am I really as an individual versus who am how much of what I think and feel and believe is just simply what I've been told to believe, the cultural belief part. I find the ability to get on a plane or a train or a boat, and a few hours later or a few days later, and I'm looking at you, South Africa and Australia. Um, there I am in this totally different place. And it feels a little bit, like Alice in Wonderland, right? It always feels like that, especially the first time I go somewhere I've never been. It feels surreal. Like I left my place where I live, where I understand I have that sense of security with my cultural beliefs, and I know how we're going to do things, how we're going to drive, what the food will taste like, and how people are going to dress, and all this kind of stuff. And I got on some sort of vehicle, right? A boat, a train, a plane, and boom. Especially a plane, even if the longest flight I've taken was when I went to South Africa. I flew from Texas, where I was based, to Atlanta, Georgia, in the U.S., and then I flew from Atlanta, Georgia. It was it's like a 16-hour flight to Cape Town, and there was a stop in the middle in the Cape Verde Islands on South Africa Airlines, South Africa Air. Now this flight, I don't know if it's still operating. Um, at the time, I think it was one of the longest flights in the world. So you fly about 8 hours, and then you stop in the Cape Verde Islands, in northern Africa, off the coast, and they get more fuel and they change flight crews because humans, we can only stay awake and work for so many hours, and then we get back up and we go another 8 hours or so. So it's not that long. Even a 16-hour flight with a little teeny line, let's say it's 17 in change, it's still less than one day. It's not that long. I mean, if I said to you, oh, it's 17 hours, you'd be like, well, who cares? That's not even a day, right? Tell me 24 hours. At least give me another day. With the date line, of course, it'll show a different day on the calendar. But potentially, depending on where you're coming from, where you start. But the point simply is this. It amazes me. I just got on the plane. I woke up wherever I regularly live with my regular expectations. I get on a plane. I fly for some amount of hours. And, 12 hours later from leaving, San Francisco, I'm in Narita Airport. I'm in Tokyo. Or I'm in Tokyo on a layover. I had a 9-hour layover one time. I did not plan well. I flew from the West Coast in the U.S. to Japan to my favorite airport, Narita Airport, and then I guess I didn't take the best planning. I had like a 9-hour layover to go on to Australia, and I ended up in Brisbane. And the thing is, now that's a long day. But here's the deal: I still woke up in my regular place, and I woke up and I got on this vehicle plane, and I got off the plane, and even though it's the same planet, it seems so different, and I really think it's exciting. Some of it's probably a personality type. I like to go to the new place. I like going to Biloxi, Mississippi, in the U.S., or to, um, you know, uh, Maine or Vermont, or Miami. The U.S. is a pretty large geographic area. Just going to different parts of the country, going to different parts of a town is interesting. But it's there's some sort of magical feeling to that. Like, it's an anticipation. What's going to happen? Like everything is kind of exciting the first time. The second time, the third time, it smells interesting and unique. Maybe it's on the water, maybe it's in the desert. The language is interesting to listen to, even if you speak English, but you're in a different part of the country, in the U.S., you're going to hear different regional accents. You're going to hear different dialects. You're going to hear different slang, and then if you go to different other countries, you're going to hear a lot more of that. Um, so all this is to lay the predicate that our question is, hey, stereotype threat, does that exist? We've talked about a stereotype cultural belief, and I'm trying to make the case that this is not something where there's a us and a them, where they are the ones that have stereotypes and I am don't. That's just not accurate. We all have them, and the majority of them we're, I think, largely unaware of. Some of them are just benign. Maybe you go to a different part of the town or a different part of the world, and you think, oh, I really don't like wearing that color orange, but everyone else where I was, they wore that color orange, and now I realize I really want to wear purple. Okay, maybe it's not a big deal. But some of the things that we have the stereotypes about are not benign. And some of the ways that we treat each other as humans can be really destructive. Literally, we can destroy each other based on my stereotype of your fill in the blank quality. And we do it on all types of things. We do it on our size, we do it on our shape, we do it on our color, we do it on our gender identity. It is amazing. I know that, and it's so odd because again, it's cultural, and when you leave that mindset of that culture, it doesn't even make any sense. I'm thinking of this. So I don't want to upset any of my Trekkies out there, but Star Trek, which I am a bit of a fan of, the original series from the 1960s, they had an episode where, and this is just from memory, so I'm sorry if I'm inaccurate in many of my details, but big picture, there was an episode. So Star Trek is, people go out into uh, the world, um, to different planetary systems and to different places to sort of see and explore and whatnot on a starship Enterprise. So there's an interaction with another culture, and the culture, of course, these are human actors. It's a television show in the 1960s, but this other culture, the people, the beings, you won't call them people, but the beings in the other culture had, of course, they're human actors, but basically the human actors had their faces painted so that they looked like half of their face was dark complected and half of their face was light complected. Um, and of course, this was to represent this other um, being. They weren't supposed to be humans; they were supposed to be another um, entity. So they, but half their face is light complected, half their face is dark complected. So the humans from Earth are sort of interacting and talking, and also other types of beings that are on the starship, Vulcans and partial Vulcans and everything. And I know for my Trekkies, I'm really upsetting you, but here's the thing: my heart is in the right place. Trust me. But the thing that was fascinating, of course, is so the other people who aren't from that place, or other beings where they have half their face is light complected, half their face is dark complected, thought, oh, okay, they were trying to talk to them. There seemed to be like there were problems, right? Like there's conflict and friction. And the interesting thing is that it seemed like, well, wouldn't everyone get along because at least half their face is light complected and half their face is dark complected, but everyone had that. It wasn't like some of the other people were all one complexion; they were all half complected. But the part of the show that's sort of the cultural eye opener, which that show did really well, Star Trek, and still does. I saw the most recent film recently, and I really enjoyed it. And also the Twilight Zone. I thought that original series, The Twilight Zone, did a really good job of this too. But so the people are half complected light and half complected dark, on their faces. But the thing is, when they started talking and explaining it, they were saying that some of them, were light complected on the right side, and some of them were light complected on the left side. So even though they were all sort of half complected light and dark, they were complected in the different sides of their faces. So they still had the same animosity and stereotypes, and where you labeled the other, right, as negative or positive. And it's the same thing. I've traveled to parts of the world where I've asked people, I don't know, I don't understand. Explain to me why one tribe in this part of the world wants to kill another tribe, or one sect of the same religion wants to kill another sect. You're the same religion, or you're the same. It's difficult when you're an outsider. You just think, well, who really cares? But we can go anywhere in the world, and you would think, well, why? Well, why would someone who's Christian want to kill someone else who's Christian? Well, hey, if someone's Protestant and someone's Catholic, then you may have a problem. Or Protestant and another sect. And it's the same thing with any religion. You think if you're not in that, you think, well, I don't understand. You're all in the same group. But the people in the group have the same version of the left side, right side complexion thing. They just have all these other differences that to them are everything. Um, as an outsider, I ask questions because again, we talk about this in other programs. There are no stupid questions, right? And if you don't know, how are you going to know if you don't ask? So I've asked people when I've worked in different parts of the world, and I'm an outsider and I don't see it. I asked them, well, how can you tell what tribe someone is, or how can you tell what sect of the same religion? In my mind, big picture, the same big picture religion, and the people will have explanations. Will try to tell me that they say they can tell, and I say I can't tell, but they say they can. And people in modern times today, right now, people go and kill each other and harm each other over this stuff. So it sounds like, oh, who cares about an old television show where people were, one side light complected, one side dark complected. But it was certainly it was trying to stir for the audience that from the outside it's all silly. But if you're inside of something, people die for this. And when you talk to people, um, even in the U.S., who are involved in, like criminal gangs, right? And especially from sort of low socioeconomic neighborhoods, those people will talk to you about how that block or that part of that block is everything. And they'll kill someone from a different part of the street or a different thing. And I've asked people in those settings, um, I've been a criminal defense lawyer. I've done a lot of different volunteer work. I'll ask people, well, here's the deal. You don't even own this house. Like, you don't even own the block, right? So why would you, I mean, it's not even logical. It's not even like you own this property. Someone else is trying to, trespass on your private property. I don't even understand it. And then sometimes in those gangs, even though they're all in their own little tiny geographic areas, some people wear certain colors of clothes and then other people wear different colors, and then they'll kill each other over that. It sounds silly, but it's just as silly as all the rest of it. If you're not inside of it, if you're inside of that culture, to you, it's everything. And you try to explain to other people, right? They were a Hutu, and I'm a Tutsi, or they wore blue and I wore red, or don't you see this? And the outsider person is thinking, no, it doesn't make any sense to me at all. And you're committing horrible acts against each other, and you're abusing each other, and people are harmed, and but to the person inside of it, it's so real because it's just like you and I. How many of the things that you do today and tomorrow are just simply because it's what your cultural beliefs are, and because you didn't make it up, but you just absorbed it and now you follow it. And again, if we don't challenge this in ourselves, then we're just as susceptible as everybody in the history of our species of falling into one of these places where it seems logical when you're in it because everyone has explained it. There's a history to it. Like those people were blue or red, or those people did this or that, or believed this or that, or whenever it was they disagreed with our group or split off into a different group or whatever. And even though someone on the outside saying none of this makes any sense at all, because you're in it, it feels so real. It feels so real. It feels like it's a fact. When if you step back and looked at it and ask yourself all the things we talk about in all of our programs, is it logical? Am I going to get good outcomes? Does it make any sense? In a larger context, you would see that it doesn't make any sense at all. But you believed it because that's what your culture has taught you. And stereotypes are that they are so resistant to change. Quick anecdote. So I've had a lot of wonderful opportunity to see some of the world. There's a lot of the world I haven't seen, and I have a long list of things I'd like to do and places I'd like to go because there's so much I'd like to learn and experience before my time is up here on this earth as we know it. So a few years ago, I was working in Canada, and one of the French um, speaking, and it's a very specific. Now here, oh well, I'm not even going to get into this. But for those of you who don't know and haven't talked to people, there's a huge, very important thing for many people in parts of the world, and in Canada. There are people who are French speaking and or French descendants who have um, a whole history of political and other issues, and then of course there are groups that are English speaking and English descendants. And so I was in part of Canada that has laws that have to ensure equal treatment and respect of French and English, um, and so and there's a whole fascinating history to this. I had the time to spend some social time with people who really explained a lot of the the history, and again, I love learning all I can. Um, and so we were having sort of a social time at a meal, and people were talking about they'd been on vacation, and so I'm talking about when I went on vacation and what I did. And so some people were talking about this really great place they went, the beach, and how fun it was. And I was listening, and I'm like, oh, I love the beach. Where exactly was this? Because I want to go. Where is it? And they turned out to be in Cuba. Now I'm sitting there, and when they said they were in Cuba on vacation, this is how powerful cultural beliefs are. And this was just a few years ago. Now I honestly thought I misheard them at first. And I thought, well, that's weird. And then they kept talking. They're like, oh, and then they were telling a story how when they were in Cuba on the holiday, they ran into another friend of theirs that everybody else kind of at the mill knew. And they were like, oh, really? It's so funny. Like, there you guys are on vacation and holiday, and you run into each other. And I was still sitting there thinking, there was a time in my brain where I'm telling you, I literally thought, well, how are they in Cuba on vacation? No, it's insane. It's a cultural belief. I had been in a culture and had absorbed this idea that I'm not going to Cuba. People don't go to Cuba. But I'm outside of the culture. I'm in a different country, even though it's a country next door to the other country. And it was that spotlight moment where you're, like I said, when you're in something and you believe a cultural belief, you believe it. It's almost like if you ask somebody, will you die if you don't have any liquids or water for a certain amount of time? People say, of course you're going to die. You have to have hydration or you're going to die, right? You'll be dehydrated. And if you get too dehydrated long enough, you'll die. Everybody knows that, right? I honestly had a moment where I sat there and thought, well, how is anybody going to Cuba on vacation? What? And it's just silly. I had been in a culture where that people in that culture had a political structure, were told they couldn't go. And the really weird thing is, I've shared about this in my other programs. I had an aunt, my great aunt, my grandmother's sister, and one of her favorite trips of her whole life that she had taken with her husband, and she had great pictures, they were beautiful, had been that she and her husband had gone to Cuba, and she had all these pictures were gorgeous. I mean, it's the 1950s, and the style is, I love that sort of the dress and the makeup and the style, and so my great aunt had always talked about how wonderful that trip was, right? And I'm up here thinking, like, initially at lunch, a few years ago at the group in Canada, I'm thinking, like, how are they going there? And then all of a sudden I realize I'm silly. I have a cultural belief because I've been working and living in a place where people aren't allowed to go. People were allowed to go, like I said, my great aunt had gone, other people, and then and that was just a specific thing to that culture. Of course, other people aren't in the same thing at all. They just get on the plane and go. Just like in some parts of the world, people wear red and blue and they kill each other. Other people think, what? That's silly. Who cares? Some parts of the world, people say, oh, I'm Christian, but I'm in this sect of Christianity, and you're in that sect of Christianity, so we're going to kill each other. In other parts of the world, people believe in other monotheistic religions, or other faiths and beliefs at all. People, it's constant. And you look at it on the outside, and you think, well, why would you kill somebody over that? That's silly. Of course, that's silliness. Stop it. Why would you harm someone? Why would you refuse to hire someone? Why would you create economic pain? Why would you refuse to educate someone? Why would you refuse to live next to someone or be friends with someone? Of course, it's silly. It's the same thing as having your face half light on the right and half light on the left. Like, who cares? You can't even really tell the difference. But to the people who are in this, it's everything. And that was a moment, a recent example where I had done it. I was sitting there like, what? And not thinking like silly. That was because you were in that thing where that's what we wear and that's what we do, and none of it was, quote, real, meaning it's a universal truth, like I need hydration or I need oxygen. So we're all susceptible to this. What is it? Stereotype threat is exactly what it sounds like. The threat of a stereotype. I mean, I've oversimplified it, but it's basically the idea where people, you and I, and one of the resources that's in the show notes, again, come to the show page, page 151 on CourtneyAnderson.com. You'll see all the links, and I've posted resources, so you can go look at everything yourself. But it's fascinating, right? Because we think we're the regular normal, and we think our cultural beliefs and the things that we believe are, we try to think that they're secure and safe because it makes us feel like we understand the world. And again, just like our ancestors who were hunter gatherers, the world's a scary place, right? We're not necessarily worried that some huge um, animal is going to come eat us, because we might have shelter, but we still are in an uncertain world. We don't know what'll happen. Maybe there'll be a hurricane, or maybe there'll be a flood, or who knows? I don't know. And it creates anxiety sometimes. It could create excitement, anticipation, or it can create anxiety. And so stereotype threat is exactly what we're talking about, the threat of a stereotype. And I really invested so much of the time setting up the idea this is a universal situation. This is not specific to any gender or any age or any ethnicity or any religion or any nation or anything like that. Now, I had thought about, and I've been looking out to research kind of on my own, how species specific this is. Like, do other species, you don't necessarily, do cats that are different species have this sort of, stereotype against each other? I don't know. Um, but humans tend to universally have these things. And whether it's, a street gang that's fighting over, two buildings on the same block where they're all renters and they're going to wear different clothes and hurt each other and economically discriminate and kill each other, or it's people in different religious sects, or it's people in different whatever. Or me sitting there like a silly thinking, well, of course they went to Cuba on vacation because that's just a cultural thing. Other people got on the plane and went to the hotel. You see how much it impacts us? And in those moments when you challenge this, like I said earlier, it's scary. It really does feel like I said, going in, when you get off that plane and it's been a long, especially those long trips because you've just been on there for so long. And you get off in that place you've never been before and everything's different. You're seeing different things and you're smelling different things and you're hearing different things. It's exciting. For me, now some people think it's scary, but I think it's exciting and I want to challenge myself. But it's also scary and exciting when I realize that in my mind I do the same thing. I had created in my mind some silliness just because I'd been in a culture and picking up cultural beliefs that when I'm talking to other people, I realize that doesn't make any sense at all. Of course, people can go places. People do it all the time. People are going places. So apparently having a nice vacation. This is not a political thing. I'm not arguing about this. I'm not arguing about any of this because that's where people get into they want to argue with me. Well, don't you see this religious group, or don't you understand why we believe this, or don't you understand why this wrong, this grievance we have, that it's real, must be. I'm not debating any of it, and I don't know enough about the specific details of what happened with one street gang, and people will get mad. Well, you can't equate that with a religion dispute or a territorial dispute or a nationality dispute. But I would argue in some ways there's a lot of research that shows these are very similar concepts. They're certainly different scale, but they're similar concepts. And I think that's what, and I can't certainly speak for, I think, Gene Roddenberry, but I think that's what the Star Trek kind of show was trying to illustrate. And that was a TV show that was aired, made before I was even born. It's trying to show this. It seems real. And you see it in modern times. I am amazed in my own life experience. They change laws, right? So let's say they had laws before that certain people can't work for the military, depending on their sexual orientation or gender identity. They had that was the law, just until literally, very recently. I mean, very recently. It was literally the law. And then they changed the law. And again, it's fear because I think people will always explain to you why they're doing what they're doing, right? Why the stereotype exists, and what stereotype threat is exactly what it sounds like, the threat of the stereotype. And it can function in different ways. But I use this example of the thing with the job, right? So there was the rules, the law, you can't do this. We don't want those people here because who knows what will happen, it'd be horrible. And then people explain and debate, and again, I'm not arguing or listening in this forum. It's not the place. We don't have the time. It's a very interesting, and all of these things are nuanced and interesting. And they really are. But my point is that when they change the law and then, oh, you can't work there, then I haven't the sky doesn't fall. In other words, the things that people are so fearful of, if those people come and live next to us or work with us or eat with us, or I know when I was a younger child, when HIV AIDS, and Ryan White was a young person and was ostracized. I think it was in Indiana. I want to say Kokomo, Indiana. It got a lot of national attention, and the idea is, well, someone with, because everyone was scared. What's this HIV AIDS? We don't know what this is. It's scary. It's horrible. So make those people go away from us. Then we don't want them to go to school. We don't want, and you look now, and it's just, and I'm getting emotional because you look and you see people, science, the beautiful part of humans, and all of the advances we've made. And we don't have that situation. There are people, we all know public people, and people, I'm sure, in your own private lives, and it's a serious situation, of course, but there's been so much progress. And now, of course, no one would think anything. No one would even imagine something so silly. But how many people are hurt and harmed while we're waiting to get to a point where, well, that thing where we couldn't work or eat or live or provide opportunity. Oh, well, now we changed it and everything's fine. Well, yeah, I would argue because at a certain level we are the same organisms. But the things we do to each other, and I understand often out of people's true, absolute conviction that they're doing, quote, the right thing, and or they're just scared to death of what is unknown. And one of the ways to deal with being scared of the unknown is to go out there and make it known. That's why I advise that we try new things, eat different food, go to different places, drive on a different street in your town, walk down a different area when you're out with your dog, just to see it, just to experience it. It does open up your experience, and in many instances, it may get you to a point where you challenge your own cultural beliefs. So, stereotype threat, the whole idea here is that the stereotypes are these culturally held beliefs that are resistant to change. My argument is they're universal. The idea of stereotype threat is that people are threatened by the stereotype, and then they will behave in ways often that are counterproductive. I had mentioned this concept in one of our Educators Eden series shows, right? Where we talked about education, we talked about underachievers. And there's a link in the show notes, of course, CourtneyAnderson.com, episode 151, which is part of this source was shared in that other Educators Eden, but there's another part of it I added. So here's what we're talking about. Stereotype threat is what? It's the threat of the stereotype. So if the stereotype is people like me are beautiful, then the stereotype threat might be that I'm worried I'm not pretty enough because everyone knows people like me are beautiful. Okay. If the stereotype threat is people like me are not good with math or science, then the threat is that if someone wants me to do math or science, I'm going to think, well, of course I can't do that because I'm me, right? People like me don't do math or science. If the stereotype threat is people like me are very athletic and can run fast and jump high, the stereotype threat, again, it can work both ways. It can work where people feel like they have to do that thing because that's what they're supposed to do. And there's a lot of research, and I've taught it in some of my um, um, uh, multicultural programs where we talk about this whole idea of the model minority, where some people, it depends on the part of the world you're in. But some people are in a group where they're told your group is the good group. Your group is the group that always does the right thing. Your group is smart. Your group is hardworking. And then people in the group feel all this intense pressure to be that thing. So sometimes the stereotype threat is your group does excellent in math and science. So then you feel this pressure like I have to do excellent in math and science. Sort of like I made the analogy to the person who feels like I have to be pretty. And it works the other way too. If people are told your group is horrible at math and science, then people feel like, oh, I'm horrible at math and science. I can't do math and science. I'm trying so hard, I just can't do it. But so much of this is this imaginary thing. It's not imaginary in that the stereotype doesn't exist. The stereotype is real. That's why I just spent, a massive amount of time giving all these examples. It's totally cultural beliefs, real. Stereotypes, I'm arguing, real. Now, when we talk about stereotype, people usually get, depending on what type of the world you're in, what part of the world you're in, whatever it is that people in that part of the world are freaked out about, then they want to go to that thing. So if it's religion, they immediately want to go, and if it's politics, if it's sectarianism, if it's tribalism, if I don't care what it is, if it's gangs or whatever, they want to go to that one thing. If it's race, okay. But stereotypes apply to all this stuff, right? They're just a culturally held belief, widely held cultural belief, resistance to change. So it doesn't. It's not about your wherever you are in the world and what people are arguing about and wherever that part of the world is. It's a universal a thing. So if I'm in a group and I believe my group doesn't do well in math and science, then when I go take a test on math and science, stereotype threat is that I'm going to do poorly, not based on my ability to perform the math and science, but because I believe the stereotype. Now you might say, well, Courtney, that's stupid. Who would believe the stereotype? I embarrassed myself here, for a global audience on the show, and sat there and said that I sat there like a person who has no knowledge of anything and thought, well, how could somebody go to a vacation in that place? That doesn't make sense. Well, and that's because it was in my brain. It was a culturally held, widely believed. Of course, you don't go to that part of the world. Now, when I left that culture, I'm sitting somewhere else, and I didn't even go far in terms of geographically. I went to a bordering place. I could have literally gone like a mile over a border or a kilometer, and I didn't have to go far. I could have gone 10 minutes. But the people there believed something different. And so when I say it's not real, what I mean is that the belief, the widely held belief exists. Whether or not that is accurate is the question. And that's what the whole show is today, right? Stereotype threat does not exist. That's what we're asking. Now, I've made the argument stereotype does exist. And obviously, I'm making the argument stereotype threat does exist. So I'm saying it's a myth. It is a myth that stereotype threat does not exist. That is a myth. So there's a New York Times article, which I was mentioning, that I had a quote from an earlier show, the Educators Eden show on underachievers. But let me give you a bigger example. I added more content. So from the New York Times, the link's on the show page. All right, so here we go. So it's talking about, here's from the quote. It says, the phenomenon known as stereotype threat. Members of groups believed to be academically inferior, African American and Latino students enrolled in college, or female students in math and science courses, score much lower on tests when reminded beforehand of their race or gender. It goes on to say, information found that black students performed comparably with white students when told that the test they were taking was a laboratory problem-solving test. Black students scored much lower, however, when they were instructed that the test was meant to measure their intellectual ability. In effect, the prospect of social evaluation suppressed these students' intelligence. Okay, that's language to say exactly what you think it says. If you tell someone they can't do something, and that's a culturally widely held cultural belief, resistant to change, and they believe it, then they think I can't do it, and then they'll self-sabotage themselves in doing it, which will then make them remind themselves, see, I knew I couldn't do it. And then all the other people that hold the widely held belief say, see, look, their scores are low. That's what we said. They can't do it. You see how it feeds itself? Now, you may think, well, who cares? The quote I added from that resource, from that New York Times article, says this, which tells you a lot about the author. It says this. It says, minorities aren't the only ones vulnerable to stereotype threat. So that tells you the author of the article sees themselves as an us them, right? The author of the New York Times article sees themselves as, hey, I'm not a minority, so I wasn't really worried about stereotype threat. But listen to the rest of the quote. It says, minorities aren't the only ones vulnerable to stereotype threat. We all are. Again, that's from the perspective of that author. I'm editorializing. Clearly, they think that they're not in that group. So weird, right? Going forward with the quote. A group of people notably confident about their mathematical abilities. White, male, math, and engineering majors, editorializing in college, we certainly can conclude, who received high scores on the math portion of the SAT. Okay, so let's go over it again. A group of people notably confident about their mathematical abilities. White, male, math, and engineering majors who received high scores on the math portion of the SAT did worse on a math test when told that the experiment was intended to investigate, quote, why Asians appear to outperform other students on tests of math ability. Now, this I think is extremely important. The whole first part of the show, where I kept giving all these different examples and going over and over again, the cultural beliefs, and trying to make the argument that they're universal, and trying to make the argument that none of us are immune, and trying to make the argument that you and I hold these often. We don't even realize that they're cultural beliefs. We think there are ideas, but they're not. The author of this article clearly was trying to tell us a couple of things, that that author feels that they're not a minority one. So apparently they weren't worried potentially. I don't know the author. What I'm saying is that when you separate and do an us and them, it's very easy then to think, well, I'm not worried about that. I wasn't interested in that anyway. It's not my problem. It's their problem, right? If you told me, oh, people who own, pet rats have a lot of problems when their pet rats don't behave, I would think, well, that's sad, and I care about all animals, but I don't own a pet rat, so I'm not going to, sit around worried about that. So the author was saying, like, stereotype threat, I guess the argument potentially was that applies to you only if you're worried about a stereotype being a threat in a negative way, right? But then the author says, but there's research that shows, here are white male, like, so white European American, we're assuming, male gender identity, math and science, math and engineering majors, so math and engineering majors in university, received high scores on the math portion of SAT. So the argument is, here are people who have been measured to be competent, extremely competent, right? They have the high scores of the math portion of SAT. They know they can do math to a high level. And yet, when you told them before they took it to math test that the test was to investigate why Asians appear to outperform other students on tests of math ability, now their scores are worse. And I really do appreciate this, because I think it brings the point that I've been trying to make for the last hour. This is not an us versus them thing. This is not a gender specific or ethnic specific or religious specific or any size or anything, age, anything you give me. This is a universal challenge for us as organisms in these societies and these behavior patterns we engage in, whether they're in a block or a neighborhood or a local region or a nation or a group of nations. If you tell someone and they believe it, then they believe it. So there's been data and media coverage, and there's some there's lawsuits where people say, look, although the majority of the U.S. are not Asian Americans or Asian descendants, in some university systems, they have a very high representation in entering classes or in university programs. Now, I would argue that if someone has the tenacity and the discipline and has a widely held cultural belief that education is important, then you're going to get really different outcomes than if you have somebody who thinks education's nice, but I'm going to go out and have fun and balance my time a little bit differently. We as a group, as a species, it's this. It's obviously tied to these fears, right? That someone else is getting something we don't have, or someone else, or the idea of the scarcity of resources. So this New York Times article is, I think, great because it is showing that there's some understanding that this isn't a thing that applies to other people. You're not worried about stereotype threat if you're, I guess the article is, if you're a white male that has high SAT scores. But why shouldn't you be? Because if you were a black female that had high SAT scores, why should you have to be the only one that has to deal with stereotype threat? Right? And of course, when you read the articles that are attached, there's another resource that I have put in the show note page that is. Just trying to make sure I have it. Here it is. It's a short little article from Cornell University, and it's entitled "On Stereotype Threat and How to Combat It." And this article and the other one I read to you earlier from the Columbia University roundtable presentation. This other paper here from Cornell University, David M. Biek, also again quotes the same thing. Even white males on a math test, when confronted with a negative comparison to Asian males, right? So it's showing here, and these are all linked to in the show page. It's showing here that, oh, this isn't a thing that applies to females who are dealing with a stereotype threat with their own abilities in terms of maybe math or science or physical strength or ability to work certain jobs. It maybe it's not something that only applies to minorities. Now, in the U.S., the term minority also is shorthand for ethnic diversity. So different colors and African and Hispanic, Latino, Asian, different backgrounds. I was speaking to a friend of mine who is from South Africa, and if it's because of course in South Africa the majority it's sort of the inverse. The majority of the population is black, and then the minority groups are the European Africans, the Indian Africans, so the same Asian, European, the same thing, sort of inverse. And so it's interesting because minority only means the smaller group. It doesn't mean black. It doesn't mean Hispanic. It doesn't mean Asian. It doesn't mean any of that. And of course she comes from a society where it's the opposite. The minority groups and are are not. They're descendants of Europeans, of Dutch and English, and they're descendants of Indians and all the other diverse groups. And I worked in South Africa and certainly find that a really dynamic and really interesting part of the world. And I'm going to do some shows on different parts of the world and share some of my um, ideas and feelings and excitement and just enthusiasm of learning about the world. But the point is that these articles are in a way sort of like, wow, stereotype threat. Yeah, look, even men. Well, of course. As I mentioned at the beginning of the show, this whole idea, well, men aren't emotional. Men can't express that well. It's so offensive. So offensive. So stereotype threat is this whole concept, right? That, oh, they told me I'm not good at this thing, and of course it's widely held belief. I hold the belief at some level. So now I'm not good at the thing. And when you read through some of these resources, I get a little emotional because it talks about the toll it takes on people trying to figure out how to combat this, how to deal with it. And there's the article that talks about contending with stereotype threat at work is a whole nother program that we need to go into depth on another program. But it lays out the different ways people try to counteract it or deal with it and the toll it takes on people. Like some people thinking, I'll just outwork it. I'll just show everybody I'm exceptional. I'm so great. I'm a hard worker. I'm not that thing. Some people try to run away from that group. So someone who might be outwardly identified as being in a certain group tries to go out of their way to not be in that group. And I'm here toward wrapping this episode up, and I have to mention this. So the question, of course, was stereotype does not exist, right? That's what we're asking. That's the show question. And stereotype threat does exist, and it exists for men and for women and for all gender identities, and it exists for I'm going out here all different ethnic backgrounds and religious backgrounds and racial backgrounds and colors and ages and nationalities, and we're all in this together. Because remember, we can fight over, we collectively as humans, over all kinds of things. Who's wearing different color outfits, who has, different colors on different sides of their face. I mean, all kinds of stuff. This is not, I'm not making it up. The stereotype threat is how much are you and I going to let these widely held cultural beliefs that may have zero relationship to our individual reality and who we are, how much are we going to let that impact our lives? And like I said, I got emotional when I read through some of this because of the toll it takes on people. And some people, again, dissociate with, right? They don't want to be in that group. As we wrap this up, this is so it was over 20 years ago now. I was in college. I was getting my undergraduate degree at a very large school. That's an excellent academic school, and but had a very small percentage, about 2%, somewhere around that, were black. So that included, I'm sure, black Americans, and then Africans or people from Caribbean, people from anywhere in the world, right? Whatever, okay. Who visually were or who identified on their own as black, which now is called African American, which is called Negro or colored. Or there's lots of different words, but the group that looks darker complected or that identifies as such. So they had a student support group for people because this is a tiny percentage of people in a huge school. So the school has still runs somewhere in the 40,000, somewhere around 50,000 enrollment total. That's undergrad and all the other programs, grads. And but there's little teeny tiny percentage, relatively speaking. Maybe the percentage is too big. I don't know. We'd have to look at the numbers, right? Who's qualified? This is a whole thing that people fight over in all these societies, right? Who gets what jobs and who has what opportunities for education and all of this. Again, this idea of potentially, maybe it's true of scarcity of resources, right? So everyone of quote them that takes a job or takes a enrollment in school denies us. The challenge, of course, is we all simultaneously are both us and them because there is no difference. But digression. So they had a student support group. So it was a few people. It was maybe like, I don't know, 10 to 15 people who happened to all be or be identified as with the U.S. code minority, which person of color, whatever, black, whatever you want to call it. Okay, so we were in the meeting, and this is again several decades ago now, so it's from memory, but it hit me emotionally, so I still remember it. So we were talking, and it's all the stuff that you always have to deal with when you're these are traditional age students. So everybody's in their late teens or early 20s, and dealing with being in this huge campus. It's a big physical campus. It literally has tens of thousands of people that are enrolled there, and then other numbers of thousands of people that work there. It's a labyrinth of a system in terms of just the infrastructure and getting stuff done, and you have a lot of people transitioning from more lives of privilege where maybe they hadn't supported themselves before, or lived independently, and now they are. Even if they're on a campus housing dormitory, they're still making decisions that they didn't make when they were living with parents or grandparents or whatever. So it's a lot going on. It's a tough time, for any adult anywhere in the world transitioning to independence and this is sort of the setting. So it's like I said, somewhere around a dozen people, and we'd send these little groups, and they were supposed to help us, feel less isolated. I think that was the goal. So student support. So the university has it there. Let's get together, student support, talk to your peers, all this kind of good stuff. And it's all the kind of things about time management and enrolling for your classes and making sure you're staying on top of your assignments and all of that. I've mentioned in other programs, I've taken ownership for some of my challenges, especially when I was younger. I still have it a bit where I just want to get everything done. So I was in school, but I graduated from undergraduate at 20 years old. So I was moving quickly. I was mostly just focused on taking the most number of credit hours as quickly as I could so I could graduate and move on to the next thing because I was, I feel like I had so many things to get done. So I wasn't worried about school. I wasn't worried about any of my academics. I wasn't anything like that because I was taking, a lot of classes and I was moving very quickly so I could move on to the next thing. But it is hard to make the transition, and this is the second university I'd gone to. I spent a year, my first year full-time college student at a different school, and then I transferred to this school, and this is in a big city, relatively speaking. And so, it's a lot to learn, and I was new to the city. I'm finished, I'm moving quickly with all my classes. I'm, in a lot of ways, I'm, we are who we are. So the group was sitting together and everyone's sort of talking about all this variety of things, right? All this from sort of your basics and life into school and what do people want to do with their future. I, of course, am the problem of I'm too driven, focused, and I'm very on task. But it was nice to talk to people, and it was mixed genders, so I'm thinking it was probably there were more females than males, but it was a pretty mixed group. But there were more females than males on the campus, so as students, so that sort of made sense. And so Latino was so fascinating when I was reading through these articles that you're going to go. I strongly suggest go read through on your free time on the show notes. So we're talking, and a couple of students started to say things along the lines of, because understand that because there's a little teeny tiny percentage of people that are visibly identified as black. And the culturally widely held cultural beliefs are that at that time, especially, there were lawsuits, and oddly enough, they're still at the same exact school. This is decades later, the same lawsuit. But there were some people who were in court, literally making an argument that there were people that were in the school that were of different U.S. minority groups who were unqualified, and that I guess the argument is that they shouldn't be there at all because they're either too dumb or too lazy or both to, I guess, be able to do the work. I never exactly understood the full analysis. Now, part of the analysis is that it's just unfair, right? That everybody should, if you have a test, everyone takes the test, and then whoever has the highest score gets to go to get the prize. I don't necessarily disagree with that, partially because I do test really well. So I like when we're going to use test scores because that's where I shine. In fact, that's one of the reasons why I was able to go through school so quickly because I took tests when I was in high school that gave me college credit, right? Advanced placement. I love tests. Give me a test any day of the week because I usually score extremely, the top of whatever. So then my life is easy. My problem that I had, part of the reason I was in the peer group was I have problems with time management because I take on way too much. And I have 8 million ideas, and I'm running in 8 different directions, and stuff falls through the cracks. So that was more of my challenge. I could test out of anything, and I'd rather do that than have to have work on something for 4 or 5 months in a semester. So digression, but that impacts though how stereotype threat impacts me. In other words, when you read through the article, you'll see how people who's susceptible to stereotype threat, and again, we'll do another show where we go over all of the framework, not all of it, but break it down. But they talk about this, and one of the reasons I think that for me individually, stereotype threat's not as effective is I define myself differently within my sort of microculture. So I know what my test scores are. I also know that I'm my parents are both have college graduates and undergrad and graduate school. They both have multiple college degrees. My grandparents on both sides are college graduates. My grandmothers, and I had both my grandmothers had a couple of Mr. Rights. Um, so not necessarily that they were that their Mr. Rights were all college graduates, but my parents, my grandmothers both, and then my grandmother's parents, and on my dad's side, my grandmother's grandparents. So I'm, fifth generation and fourth generation college graduate. So in my little world, my experience and my expectations for myself are based on that, and that sort of trumps and overrides what people say to me directly in real life. And people have said horrible things to me. People told me to drop out of college based on, I guess, their interpretation of my ability based on my complexion, which I thought was ludicrous and silly when about my business. But I was able to think it was ludicrous because I thought I knew, like I know I achieve, right? I've always achieved academically on a test, right? I was in all these special classes for supposedly being, I hate the word gifted. I do all this advanced stuff. Like I would looked at them and thought they were silly. And they weren't, and I felt like you're not even talking to me. You don't know me. You're just saying this because you have these stereotypes. So I didn't internalize it as much, I think, as someone who, what if I was first in my family to go to college and I had to have somebody all day, a student peer tell me I shouldn't be there, a teacher, a professor, an administration professional tell me to leave, that can take a toll on you. It bothered me because it was annoying and it was inaccurate. But it didn't impact my sense of self and my what I'm going to get my goals done. But I'm an anomaly. And one of the reasons I would get upset about stereotype threat is because why does it exist? Is because it works. And I've said this and I say it all the time, who told you this? Where did it come from? If there's a pervasive idea that, and people are saying, well, you don't want to take math and science, you got to figure out why. Could it be that those are really good jobs? Could it be that what's the reason why? Is it basically an advertisement or commercial where someone's trying to tell you something because they want you to believe it? And if so, then that's where I argue that we have to take responsibility to delve into our own minds and ask ourselves, is this accurate? So the sad thing I was referencing earlier is I was in the student group, about a dozen students, more females than males, but a good range. I'm mostly focused at that point on my myriad of problems with wanting to do everything at once. I want to own a business. I want to finish school right now, and then I'm going to, go to law school, and I'm going to finish that, and I'll be, and most of my plan, it sort of worked. It was stressful, and there were some bad parts, but overall, I could have had a better life if I had been more organized and had taken some time. I look back now, and I can't believe how long ago it was, but at the time, I felt like I just had to get it all done right then. So that's a learning lesson. I did another show on the failure flashback series about some of this. The thing, though, that was painful is when you read the article about stereotype threat at work. So this the article, a lot of this stuff is stereotype threat, and then one of the resources says there are over 300 peer-reviewed studies, but a lot of it talks about academic focus, right? Like what can we do to close what they call the achievement gap, which in some places is meaning that you give the students, and then some genders quote do better, score different, and other ethnic groups or socioeconomic groups score differently. So that's what they call the achievement gap, right? So a lot of it's about students and education, especially younger students. But this focus on stereotype threat at work is a whole another fascinating part of it. But the thing that the student group that caused me the distress and emotional scar is that we were talking and talking, and I've got a million things going on in my mind as usual. And a couple of people started to talk about how, because, and I'm not exaggerating this at all, it was it was very evident that multiple people did not want people who they thought didn't belong there. The challenge is, though, when they make these decisions based on what people look like, of course it's ridiculous, because I'm not walking around with my test scores, tattooed on my head. But people said and did awful things, and I'm not going to go into details, but just imagine you get up every day and you go out to do your work, and school was my work at that time, and basically, and many times directly, people tell you shouldn't be here. You're too dumb. That's hard. And it's really hard when, well, it's hard no matter what. But the thing is, if the resources, the New York Times said, well, even when you said to, white male students with high math SAT scores, oh, this is because Asian students do better at math and their scores go down. That's because that's the thing where your brain is saying, well, see, that's what they told me. It's a widely held belief. And at some level, it triggers that in yourself. And you think, well, I guess not. Even though my SAT scores were high, Asians, whoever, do better. So now my score went down. That's what happens. And it's amazing. So in the student group, what happened is that we were talking, and people started to do what the article about stereotype threat at work does. People started to try to disassociate themselves with the group, and people said things sort of along the lines of, "Well, I'm not." Some people said things like, "I don't want to be black," and then some people said things like, "Well, I'm not black." Now, of course, it's argued, and I certainly do see it. All this stuff is a construct, racial. In other words, it doesn't mean anything. We are the same. We're humans. We're organisms. Some people have different skin colors, and as the laws changed in many parts of the world, including the U.S., people of different racial groups started to be allowed to marry and have children. In the world, again, we continue to live, and some of those children are able to perform all kind of jobs, right? Do all kinds of things. So it hurt me emotionally, because it would be like, imagine anything. It would be like a group of people, you get together, a group of people in your same gender. So it's all men and you're a man, and everyone's sitting around, and somebody says, I don't want to be a man. Men are horrible. I don't want to be this anymore. I'm not this. Now, of course, part of you is sitting there thinking, what do you mean you're not this? You are this. I can see that you're this. You identify as this, you present as this, you are this. I understand, and it creates so much pain. It created more pain for me in some ways than it does the other direct kind of abuse that people were giving in the environment, because I understand it, of course. Nobody wants to be in the bad group. Nobody does. Nobody wants to be in the ugly group. Nobody wants to be in the dumb group. Nobody wants to be in the useless group. Nobody wants to be in the bad group. Like, nobody. And so it's so psychologically damaging, and that the workplace stereotype threat article report talks about this, that you begin in your mind, it's so difficult, because in your mind you think, well, of course I don't want to be that bad thing, and everybody knows that the bad thing is that one thing. I don't want to be that. And then you think, I'm not that. So then you think, well, how can I not be that? And then you sit in a room with people and you get adults, they were all adults, saying things that are totally illogical, like, I'm not this thing. Now, many parts of the world, and I've seen this because I've traveled and watched television and seen advertising, people will actually market, companies, for-profit companies will market, okay, you want to be the other thing. You want to change the shape of your eyes. You want to be a lighter skinned person. In some parts of the world, they try to say, do you want to be a darker skin? Because I think the idea is that if you're wealthy and you're out and about, you don't want to be too fair skinned. You want to be more tan. They call it. All of these things are businesses making money off of people's self perception. But I sat in a room with people at a leading university thinking, well, this should be the group of people that are feeling, yeah, I mean, we're stressed out. Everybody that's stressed out that's trying to, study and get things done. But it was a core hatred of themselves. Like, I hate this thing so much and I don't want to be this thing. I'm going to do everything I can to like not be this thing. But the other challenge is, of course, is just whether or not you think you're that thing. That's why these things are, they're constructs. The world sees you as that thing. So, I mean, it's so self-destructive and it's so hateful. And you see this a lot of times with kids. People who come from abusive families and families of origin where the child was, beaten and abused, and the child believes that the core of them is bad. And it goes two ways usually. And the article talks about this more nuance about stereotype threat at work. But if you don't want to be the bad thing, then you try to do everything not to be that thing, right? You'll try to do everything in your power to associate with the other thing, the good thing. And that's, and that's some of what you'll get. People literally have plastic surgery and do all kind of things because they don't want to be associated with the thing. It's a bad thing, and they don't want to be the bad thing. They want to be the good thing. And you can either change the society where society stops having that cultural belief that's widely held and resistant to change. That could happen. That's part of what people try to do collectively and individually. But the other part of it is, how do you do it in your day-to-day life? What do you do about it? And that's why you'll get people who then try to embrace and say, well, no, I'm this thing, but I'll redefine this thing. I'll make this thing beautiful. I'll make this thing smart. I'll make this thing fabulous. They try to redefine it, right? I'll just rebrand this thing. That's part of what the article also talks about. And then you also get, which the article didn't talk about so much at work, really, because probably people who do this, you'll get people who think, well, I don't want to be this thing, so I'll just give into the stereotype. And I saw this. I saw this as a really young person. Like, there was a young boy I was in school with when I was like, I don't know, 12 or 13. So, and then my family moved away to another part of the world. And then it turned out years later when we were in high school, like 4 or 5 years later, I guess 4 years later, we ended up in the same school in high school for a few months at the end of high school. So when I knew this boy when we were, young, he was in, his test scores were really high. Obviously, he was in all these enrichment classes and gifted classes with me. So, okay. By the time I saw him a few years later, now I already knew him, right? Like and his classes are small, and so you kind of get the same group of people in these classes all the time. And sometimes they have programs where you're with only these other students that are, all of your classes, except for maybe, physical education or something. So you're with a group of very similarly scoring, I guess, other students, which actually it's a whole different debate, but I actually found it to be a very positive experience overall because it helped me feel, normal. And in terms of all my weird ideas and vocabulary choices. So all that's to say, I saw this student all these years later, and we paths crossed again. And now the student was he had, I guess, obviously was intentional. He sort of had affected a whole new way of speaking. He was dressing differently, and he had intentionally. Basically told me that he went and he didn't. He turned in very poor work and failed classes so that he would get out of the gifted enrichment, advanced classes, so that he'd be more accepted socially. And you do see this, where people are so, especially in that adolescent period where people are reforming who we are to some degree. Nobody wants to be that bad thing. Nobody wants to be it. So what you'll see is people who go out of their way. If they're told you're a bad person, you're not intelligent, you're into sports, then people who don't even really like sports or whatever go out of their way to act like that. Look at me, I'm acting out, I'm bad. You said I was bad, right? And it sounds funny, but it's awful. How many people waste their lives on this? And once it starts, people get serious. Maybe they were arrested, maybe they have a criminal record, and for what? So that I understand why. I do understand why. If you're in a group and everybody tells you the society's culturally held, widely held belief is your group is horrible and it's the worst group ever, and nobody wants to be in that group, then you kind of have two choices. You have a couple choices, but you either accept that at some level and think, okay, well then fine. I kind of opt out of this. I'll just be whatever it is you say I am. You say I'm this, fine. I'll go be this thing. Which of course is incredibly self-destructive, and it's exactly what I would argue those who are perpetuating the stereotype would like to happen, because it's less competition for jobs, for education, for all that good stuff, right? Because all those people now out of the competition, and they're distracted somewhere with some silliness in criminal justice systems or whatever, or unable to move forward because they never went ahead and got the credentials they needed. So I would argue that's really counterproductive, but I would also argue that would probably be some of what is intended with some of these stereotypes. If someone says girls aren't good at math and science, oh, girls shouldn't apply for this. Ask who's saying this. If you take half of a population in just in terms of numbers, and you get them out of the race for the economic jobs or educational programs, it ups the odds for everybody else to get in, right? They say this sometimes when you do sports and stuff, and performing, that you're psyching yourself out. And what it simply just means is, in your own head, you're just creating all this imaginary stuff to make yourself, not succeed. Now, it really helps, though, if you're psyching yourself out and the whole society is giving you the same message. And like I said, 20 something years ago, when I sat in a room of young adults at a really top school and heard people talk about this self-hatred at a level where it was one of the gentlemen, he said something like, if I saw one of you guys out on campus, because remember, it's a huge campus, it's physically large, and there's like 40, 50,000 people enrolled total. And he said something like, if I see one of you guys on campus, don't be offended, but I won't speak to you. And he said something like, because I don't want other people, my friends or other people that I'm trying to, socialize with, to think I know you. And that was because, we're the bad thing. And the problem with something like that is, it doesn't matter what your test scores are. It doesn't matter how hard you've worked or what your family history is with education. None of it is relevant. It hurts so much. And the thing is, I could tell you, it's not like I wanted to be that guy's best friend. And it was very honest of him to explain, because of course, if it had happened, I would have been like, what? But it hurt so much, and it was very honest. He just didn't want to be the bad thing. So he would come sort of to this little quiet meeting that no one knew he was coming to, and he just told us, it wasn't to be, he was trying so hard to fit in. Ah. When you read that article about continuing with stereotype threat at work, and the other ones, but especially the one about stereotype threat at work, it talks about anger. And it talks about anger being sort of this primary reaction to this. Because what do you do? First of all, you're told you're in the group and you don't have any control over it. And then everyone tells you, because you're in the group, look at all the bad things. And there's no way for you to fix it. Because for most of this, you can't not be in the group. You can try to show that you're not like the rest of the group, which I think is what the guy was trying to tell us in our meeting 20 plus years ago, that he's like a special one of the group, and that's why he didn't want to talk to us, because it would seem like he knew us, which would make him, I guess, would remind other people that he actually was in the group. I'll never understand the logic of this. But yeah, it's anger. And the problem isn't that the anger is, where do you put the anger? And when the anger is against the core of your being, it makes you vulnerable to being abused or exploited, and to being self-destructive, to hurting yourself, to devaluing yourself. It's really brave to think about your own beliefs. I shared in the early part of this program, some of my own moments of, wow, I can't believe I thought that, or that was really stupid, or it wasn't stupid, it was just a narrowly held cultural belief, and it didn't at all apply to the bigger scheme of things. And we've done these programs. We did a program on, in a war against yourself, you'll always lose. But when you have all this self-hatred, because you're the bad thing, you don't want to be the bad thing, you can't figure out how not to be it, it just puts you in this sort of spiral of really bad choices. So simultaneously, of course, many people are working to try to change these cultural beliefs that hurt individuals and societies. and that certainly is part of the solution. So I ask you to be part of that. Another part of it, people within their own individual, employment organization or their own family or their own social group or religious group trying to change that individual group, I encourage you to think about. But if none of that, just in your own head, stop yourself from the next time you start to say something. Oh, well, I'm just a mom, or I'm just stay at home. I couldn't do that. Or every time I hear somebody say things like that, even in passings at some social thing, it makes me angry. Because why are you standing here devaluing yourself? I know the stereotypes exist. I'm aware of what they are. I'm in the same culture. That's why I heard you say it, because I'm right here. But for you to stand there and turn the stereotype of threat on yourself, it's like somebody holding a weapon, and I can't stop you from doing this. And you're also teaching your kids and your family you're not worth much. What kind of role model are you? And more importantly, why are you doing this? I believe today, I believed 20 years ago, I'll hopefully believe until my time is up that, yeah, I'm of value and so are you. And we can define and dream and do all kinds of things. And it may be that we want to do nothing, and that's fine too. And it is a heavy, heavy burden to deal with these stereotype threats. Everyone has them. We talked about that. Men, we talked about the examples, right? But some people have more of them. So you may have some stereotype based on your gender that you're dealing with stereotype threat. You may also have stereotype threat based on your ethnicity. You may also have stereotype threat based on your age. You may also have stereotype threat based on your um, disabilities or special abilities. You may also have stereotype threat based on your color. You may also have stereotype threat based on your national origin, your accent, or your complexion. I mean, look, this. So some people just have more of them stacked up, so it's a lot more to weed through. Some people have less. Everybody has at least some. But at a minimum, let's just start with ourselves. So let's start with ourselves. One, stereotype threat, it does exist. So it's a myth that it does not exist. It does. And let's just start with ourselves, with examining our own cultural beliefs to try to see where it is that we are engaging in the stereotypes that may be counterproductive to ourselves and other people. And then I want you to just start with little pieces of no matter how many stereotype threats you face in your life, whether it's one or it's 15, I want us to reorient ourselves to exploring and defining and doing the things that bring us, again, that the little bits of joy, and try to find workarounds to help us handle our stress and make a commitment that we're going to define ourselves. And I think one of the things that as we wrap up this extended show today, it was painful to me when the other student said, several decades ago, if they saw me on campus, he wouldn't speak to me, and he explained why, because he didn't want other people to think that he was, knew black people. Um, it was painful because I thought about how much he was hurting himself and setting himself up for pain. But I would also ask this: if you're around other people that you perceive have these ideas about you that you're not as valuable, maybe because of your gender, maybe because of whatever, how will it benefit you to continue to be around somebody who doesn't at all believe in you? And if someone says to you, wow, you're just not like all those other guys, you're so sensitive, you're not like all the other girls, I mean, you're really smart, you're not like those other people, you really belong here, you're not like them, you're so different, that is not a compliment. That is an insult. And it's an awful insult because they're simultaneously telling you you're in the group where I think the bad thing about you. And then try to make you feel like, that I'll lower myself to say that, you're one of the better of that bad group. Wow, really? So this has been an expanded show. It had to be. And we didn't want to break it up into different episodes. So certainly, if you've stuck with us, just save it, download it, and come back and listen to some of it later if your schedule. I do again encourage you to come to CourtneyAnderson.com. We've been building out the entire site, adding all the new features, integrating everything with the social media and with the distribution of this show on multiple platforms, new technology. It's been a lot of work integrating our show sponsors. I want to encourage, of course, you to visit our show sponsors. For this show, Microsoft has the education online store for those of you who are educating yourselves in a setting as a student or faculty member. So there are discounts. Stop on over. But this is the core of us. Are we people who are going to self-destruct or let other people make us self-destruct because of what we wear or how we worship or what we look like? I think not. The whole purpose of the show, Solutions, and us stepping out and doing things on our that we want to do, creating and sharing knowledge, is that we can define things. And it's an exciting and exhilarating process to examine these ideas and ask, is that my idea? Or is that what they want me to believe? Some cultural remnant. Is someone trying to make me psych myself out? And when you're aware of it, then of course you're more immune to it. I can't be psyched out unless I choose to go along with it, right? So let's not choose to go along with it. And again, we will continue and revisit. I ask you to send me any of your, and revisit this idea in other shows, as I mentioned, and programs. And I encourage you to send me your feedback. If nothing else, the basic message is self definition, and then hopefully self acceptance. And if women or men or Asians or Hispanics or Latinos or young people or old people or people in wheelchairs and people without wheelchairs and people who are hearing impaired and people, if that group really was that dumb, right? Whoever they are, they really were that dumb at math and science, then you wouldn't even need to tell them. They just automatically be that dumb. There'd be no need to even bother with this. So I have a strong suspicion that they that someone wants that entire group to think they're that poorly skilled. And I would argue maybe it's for a reason, because the more people that psych themselves out, less competition for everybody else. And while you're sitting around somewhere psyching yourself out, spending all this time and resources on, oh, I hate me and what can I do not to be me and all of this, somebody else is out there working on getting more knowledge and having a more enjoyable holiday and feeling good about themselves. So, you got to ask yourself these questions, and they're somewhat sometimes scary questions, right? Whose idea is this? Why do I think this? But it opens up the opportunity for all those examples that we studied throughout human history and in modern times, where you look at somebody and you think, well, how did they do that? How did they, from whatever fill in the blank group that no one quote thinks is the good group, do that? Well, because they did it, because they realized it was all imaginary, and that all that stuff is what somebody else wants you to believe for their own agenda often. So just shake it off. Get out there and do whatever it is, or nothing at all, that you want to do, if that's your goal, and do it with joy and pride and define who you are. It's amazing how the world will react to you when you assert your own personal power. We talk about it in so many programs, but it's a lot to process. And again, take the articles and if they get heavy, or you think they're, if you either hate them or love them or whatever, read them, put it away, come back and look at it again. But you need to at least ask these questions, right? What kind of stereotypes are we using that are probably not helping us make good choices? Whether it's what kind of food to eat, or where to go each day, and how other cultural beliefs are impacting the choices you're making. And remember, it's all imaginary. Just like the people with the paint on the left side of their face, or the light skin on one side and the light skin on the other, or somebody who wants to kill each other because they wear different clothes. Um, in a 2 block radius. It sounds silly from the outside. When you're inside of it, it seems like it's everything. But who you are, your intellect, your gift, your creativity, your talents, your dreams, your ideas, that's the essence of you. Don't let anybody let you psych yourself out. Thank you so much. And again, I'm grateful for you being part of everything that we do and allowing us to get to episode number 151 of the show Solutions with Courtney Anderson. Thank you.